In order to stay in the moon's shadow for as long as possible, Concorde had to follow a very precise flight plan. The best chance for achieving this was over Africa, but this didn't give the team a whole lot of options for airports. Most of the runways in Africa were too short for Concorde, and the hot conditions meant that Concorde would have to carry less fuel during takeoff. They eventually settled on the island of Gran Canaria, which had a cooler climate and a great runway. The plan was to take off, fly south, and intercept the moon's shadow at a specific point over Mauritania, where it would turn and follow the shadow across the Sahara Desert. But the path of the shadow wasn't straight, and instead followed a large curve. This would make science observations from inside Concorde very difficult if it had to constantly make turns. And so Pierre and his team came up with a straight-line path that would touch the northern edge of the shadow, cut across to its southern edge, and end at its northern edge. This would give them up to 80 minutes in the shadow without having to make a single turn. Since the shadow would be traveling a little bit faster than Concorde, it would eventually outrun it, and so the team had to meet the shadow at a precise point on the shadow's leading edge. If they were to arrive more than 15 seconds late or a kilometer off, they would fall out of the shadow much sooner, and their time in totality would be drastically reduced. But arriving at the intercept point so precisely, with all the variables of weather, would be a huge challenge. Luckily, André Turcotte was one of the best pilots around, and he knew Concorde better than anyone. With a solid flight plan, Pierre recruited 4 other teams of scientists that would each carry out experiments on board Concorde. Since Concorde was going to fly over the equator, the eclipse would be directly above the aircraft. And so holes were cut into the roof of Concorde, and special windows were installed to give the scientists a clear view of the eclipse. All of the seats were removed from the cabin, and the electrical supply was modified to provide power to the science instruments. After weeks of modifications, the fastest science observatory in the world was ready to make history. On the 30th of June, at precisely 10:08 in the morning, Concorde began rolling down runway 21. Turcotte had decided to take off 20 seconds early, giving him time to correct for any headwinds that might slow Concorde down. This turned out to be a wise choice, since the weather that morning was more turbulent, and they ended up losing 8 seconds during the climb up to altitude. With 12 seconds of time still to lose before reaching the intercept point, Turcotte started deploying small air brakes to carefully bleed off some speed. This quickly brought them closer to the correct arrival time. But the winds continued to be unpredictable, and Concorde slowed down too much, falling 4 seconds behind the scheduled arrival time with just a few minutes to go. In order to make up for this, Turcotte briefly pushed the engines past their maximum operating speed of Mach 2.2, and Concorde arrived at the intercept point just 1 second late, and only a kilometer off course. At the exact same time, the sun fully disappeared behind the moon, and Concorde was now in complete darkness. Despite it being midday, the stars became visible, and the scientists could see the sun's corona through their windows. Concorde was now racing against time and the moon itself, and so the scientists got to work. Pierre and his team had developed a telescope that could measure the infrared light coming from the sun's corona. During the 74 minutes in the moon's shadow, they made measurements that furthered our understanding of the zodiac light, the layer of dust in our solar system that gets lit up by the sun. The team from the US discovered that the sun's corona has acoustic waves which cause it to pulse every 5 minutes. Concorde flew perfectly for 74 minutes before it left the moon's shadow and landed in Chad. For the scientists and pilots on board, they got to witness one of the most beautiful spectacles from the most unique vantage point. This remains the longest eclipse experienced by humans, a record that will most likely remain for centuries.